27 minutes. That was all it took for an entire galactic superpower to realize they had awakened a dormant god of war. When the alien concordant executed a human child on a live broadcast, they expected immediate submission. Instead, they bought their own total extinction with his blood. The Geneva Command Center smelled of ozone, stale coffee, and cold sweat. Deep underground beneath the Swiss Alps, the United Nations Space Command's primary diplomatic hub was locked in a state of suffocating tension. Ambassador Daniel Whitmore adjusted his tie, his fingers trembling just enough to betray the calm facade he wore. He was a veteran of the Alpha Centauri negotiations, a man who had stared down warlords and rogue AI systems without blinking. But today, the stakes were flesh and blood. Today, the enemy was the Xenian Concordat, an expansionist alien empire that viewed diplomacy merely as a prelude to subjugation. 48 hours ago, the Concorde's 7th Fleet had dropped out of hyperspace above Oak Haven, a bustling human agricultural colony on the edge of the Orion Spur. They had bypassed orbital defenses with terrifying ease, disabled the communications buoys, and seized the planetary capital. 40,000 human colonists were now hostages. Opposite Daniel, suspended in the shimmering, high-fidelity blue light of the quantum-entangled holoprojector, stood Supreme Arbiter Kalen. The alien was a towering chitinous figure draped in the ceremonial crimson robes of a Xenian conqueror. Its multifaceted eyes betrayed no emotion, only a cold, calculating superiority. "Your persistence is illogical, Ambassador Whitmore." Kalen's synthesized voice echoed through the command center, the translation software rendering the alien clicks into sterile, perfect English. "The Oak Haven system now belongs to the Concordant. You will order your outer rim fleets to stand down and dismantle their warp drives, or we will begin the systematic pacification of the colony. We have offered you unlimited mining rights to the asteroid belts in the neighboring sector," Daniel replied, keeping his voice painfully even. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the sleek metallic console. "We have offered you trade concessions that would double your empire's energy reserves, but humanity does not surrender its citizens, and we do not disarm. Release the colonists, and we can finalize the trade agreement." Kalen's mandibles twitched, a gesture the xenobehavioral analysts in the back of the room had identified as amusement. "You barter with shiny rocks while we hold your offspring. Your species suffers from a biological flaw, Ambassador. You place irrational value on individual, insignificant units. You mistake our patience for negotiation." The holographic feed shifted. The towering figure of the Arbiter moved aside, and the camera zoomed in on a sterile metallic holding cell aboard the Xenian flagship. Daniel's breath hitched in his throat. Sitting on the cold floor was a human child. The facial recognition software instantly flashed his file on Daniel's secondary monitor. Thomas Granger, age 9. Dressed in a faded blue baseball cap and a dirt-smudged Oak Haven primary school uniform, the boy was crying quietly, hugging his knees to his chest. In the background, the muffled, agonizing screams of his father, William Granger, could be heard as Xenian guards held the man back. A collective gasp rippled through the Geneva Command Center. Secretary General Richard Hayes, standing in the shadows behind Daniel, cursed under his breath. The feed was not just playing in this room. Kalen had tapped into Earth's primary communication relays. The footage was broadcasting live on every screen, every data pod, and every billboard across the solar system. Billions of humans were watching. "This is not a negotiation, Ambassador," Kalen said, stepping back into the frame, a heavy kinetic sidearm gripped in his four-fingered hand. "This is a demonstration of absolute authority. You have 60 seconds to authorize the complete disarmament of your fleet." "Arbiter, stop." Daniel's diplomatic composure shattered. He slammed his fist onto the console. "If you harm that child, you will cross a line that cannot be uncrossed. You do not understand what you are doing." "I am curing your species of its defiance," Kalen replied smoothly. 50 seconds. "We need more time. The authorization requires a consensus from the Global Assembly." Daniel lied desperately, trying to buy time for the Lockheed Kessler stealth operatives attempting to breach the Xenian ship. "Give us 24 hours. 30 seconds. Little Thomas looked up at the camera, his eyes wide and terrified. "Dad," he whimpered, his voice carrying across the vast expanse of space, piercing the hearts of billions. "I want to go home." "Listen to me, Kalen," Daniel practically roared, abandoning all protocol. "You think we are weak because we talk. You think we are fragile because we offer peace. If you pull that trigger, the treaty is void. We will not stop. We will not forgive." 10 seconds. Kalen raised the weapon, pointing it directly at the back of the boy's head. "Don't do it, Kalen. I swear to God." Time has expired. The Arbiter didn't hesitate. He didn't gloat. He simply squeezed the trigger. A flash of blinding, superheated plasma filled the screen. When the glare faded, the boy was gone, replaced by a scorch mark on the metal floor. The father's screams in the background abruptly ceased as a guard struck him down. Then Kalen looked directly into the camera. "You now understand your place in the galaxy, humans. The next broadcast will feature 10 children. You have 1 hour to surrender." The feed abruptly cut out, leaving the Geneva Command Center bathed in the dim emergency red lighting of a severed connection. For 10 seconds, there was absolute, suffocating silence. No one breathed. No one moved. The xenoanalysts stared at their blank monitors. Secretary General Hayes stood frozen, his face devoid of color. Daniel Whitmore slowly lowered his head, staring at his trembling hands. A technician in the back corner abruptly stood up, turned over a trash can, and violently vomited. The sound broke the spell. But the reaction was not what the Xenians had anticipated. There was no wailing. There was no panic. There was no desperate scramble to draft a treaty of surrender. Daniel Whitmore looked up. The fear, the desperation, the diplomatic anxiety that had plagued him for 48 hours had completely evaporated. It was replaced by something cold, ancient, and terrifyingly calm. He turned his chair around and looked at Richard Hayes. The Secretary General's eyes were locked on the blank screen. Slowly, Hayes reached into his jacket, pulled out a physical, archaic steel key, and looked at Daniel. "God forgive us," Hayes whispered. "God has nothing to do with this anymore," Daniel replied, his voice dead and hollow. "Initiate the blackout." Minute 1. Earth went dark. Not physically, the city still burned with electric light, but electronically the entire human sphere ceased to exist. To the Xenian concordant ships monitoring human space, the deafening roar of civilian traffic, commercial broadcasts, and political debates instantly vanished. The global communication networks of Earth, Mars, the lunar colonies, and the Jovian outposts were severed from the galactic extranet. Aboard the Xenian flagship Vanguard of Truth, Arbiter Kalen watched the sensor displays drop to 0. His tactical officer, a scarred veteran of a dozen planetary conquests, clicked his mandibles in confusion. "Arbiter, the human network has collapsed," the officer reported. "No distress signals. No surrender transmissions. Total silence." Kalen scoffed. "They have retreated into their dens to weep. Their societal structure is collapsing under the psychological trauma. Maintain orbital lock on the colony. They will crawl to us soon enough." They had no idea. Aboard the United Earth ship Resolve, currently hidden in the shadow of Saturn's moon, Titan, Admiral Sarah Turner stood on the bridge. The holographic replay of Thomas Grurz's execution was frozen on the main tactical table. Sarah was 52 years old, a pragmatic, hardened woman who had spent her entire career policing the fringes of human space. She had seen the worst of humanity, but she had never seen an alien species purposefully broadcast the murder of a child to force a political concession. Her comms officer, a young lieutenant named Miller, was weeping silently at his station, his tears falling onto the glass display. "Lieutenant," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the bridge like a scalpel. Miller wiped his face, straightening up immediately. "Ma'am, dry your eyes. Mourning is for tomorrow. Today we are the architects of their ruin." Sarah turned to her executive officer. "I have just received an encrypted tight beam transmission from Geneva. Level Omega clearance." The bridge crew went rigid. Level Omega had never been authorized in the history of the United Nations Space Command. It was a theoretical protocol. The Secretary-General has invoked the ARS directive, Sarah announced. The words feeling as heavy as lead on her tongue. The diplomatic treaties of 2240 are null and void. The Geneva Conventions have been suspended regarding the Zenian Concordant. She walked over to the tactical console, punching in her biometric codes. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a secondary interface glowing with an ominous amber light. Unlock the containment vaults on Deimos, Sarah ordered. Authorize the deployment of the Shiver-class dark matter warheads. Spool up the singularity drives on all capital ships. The executive officer swallowed hard. Admiral, the Galactic Council banned those weapons. If we use them, the fabric of space-time in the Oak Haven system. I don't care if we crack the planet in half, Sarah said. Her eyes locked on the frozen image of the Zenian Arbiter. They wanted to see what humanity looks like without its limiters. We are going to show them. Begin the countdown. Minute 15. In the shipyards of Mars, the immense, sleeping leviathans of the human fleet awoke. These were not the sleek diplomatic cruisers the aliens had seen on border patrols. These were dreadnoughts built during the dark years of the Solar Civil War, mothballed because they were deemed too destructive for a civilized galaxy. Across the Sol system, 140 capital ships severed their civilian safety regulators. Reactor cores burned at 120% capacity, bleeding dangerous levels of radiation into space. They didn't care. The maintenance crews at the SpaceX Boeing Luna shipyards didn't retreat to the bunkers. They stayed on the gantries, manually overriding the safety locks, cheering as the massive dreadnoughts broke orbit. Minute 20. Back on Earth, billions of citizens were walking out of their homes. In London, New York, Tokyo, and New Delhi, traffic stopped. People stood in the streets, looking up at the sky in absolute, unbroken silence. There were no riots. There was no looting. Psychologists in the Galactic Council had long theorized that humanity was a fractured species, prone to internal conflict and incapable of unified thought. They had fundamentally misunderstood human nature. Humanity fought itself because it had no other worthy adversary. But when an outside force threatened the pack, when a predator dragged a child from the cave, every racial, political, and economic divide evaporated in an instant. Humanity did not panic. Humanity synchronized. Minute 26. Arbiter Kalen paced the bridge of the vanguard of truth. The silence was beginning to unnerve him. It had been nearly half an hour since the broadcast. There should have been pleas. There should have been chaos. Still nothing? Kalen demanded. No, Arbiter, the tactical officer replied, his voice laced with a strange hesitation. But we are detecting a massive gravitational anomaly in the Sol sector. It's beyond our scale. It's as if they are tearing a hole in the universe itself. Impossible. Their slipspace drives are primitive. They cannot generate that kind of mass. Arbiter, the sensor officer shouted, panic finally bleeding into the alien's voice. The anomaly isn't moving toward us. It's already here. Minute 27. The galaxy broke. Above Oak Haven, the vacuum of space did not simply ripple. It shattered like a mirror. A massive, jagged tear in the fabric of reality ripped open, screaming with the violent light of uncontained Cherenkov radiation. The Zenian fleet, consisting of 300 advanced warships, was violently thrown off its axis by the sheer gravitational displacement of the rift. Alarms blared across the alien flagship as their shields were stripped away by the spatial distortion. From the burning violet tear, the U.S. Resolve emerged, not gliding gracefully, but violently thrusting its way into real space like a knife through flesh. It was immediately followed by the UES Vengeance, the UES Wrath, and 137 other vessels of pure, unadulterated human malice. They did not hail the Concordant. They did not demand surrender. Before the Zenian ships could even realign their targeting sensors, Admiral Sarah Turner gave a single two-word order. Erase them. The human fleet unleashed a barrage of weapons that defied galactic physics. Dark matter torpedoes struck the outer Zenian frigates. There was no explosion. Instead, The alien ships simply collapsed inward, crushed into spheres of hyperdense matter the size of a marble before winking out of existence. Kalen watched in absolute, paralyzing horror as his invincible fleet was systematically butchered. This wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. Shields are gone. Engineering is gone, the tactical officer shrieked. They are firing singularity warheads. Arbiter. They are breaking the laws of physics. Hail them, Kalen roared, falling to his knees as the flagship violently shuddered. Send the surrender codes. Tell them we submit. On the bridge of the Resolve, Lieutenant Miller looked at his console. Admiral, the Xenian flagship is broadcasting an unconditional surrender across all frequencies. They are begging for a ceasefire. Admiral Sarah Turner stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the alien fleet burn through the main viewport. She thought of the little boy with the baseball cap. She thought of the 27 minutes of silence. Communications are still down, Lieutenant, Sarah said coldly, her voice devoid of any mercy. I didn't hear a thing. Understood, Admiral, Miller replied, his finger hovering over the weapons console. Firing main battery. Atmospheric re-entry burned the hulls of the drop pods black, turning them into streaks of jagged fire across the Oak Haven sky. Inside the lead pod, Major Abraham Kelly of the 75th Ranger Regiment, Space checked his kinetic assault rifle. His heart rate hovered at a terrifyingly calm 60 beats per minute. He was a veteran of the Jovian piratical purges, a man who had seen the ugly side of human expansion. But today was different. Every soldier in the drop bay had seen the broadcast. Every man and woman strapped into the orbital descent vehicles carried a piece of Thomas Grurz's ghost with them. Down on the surface, Subarbiter Vex stood inside the requisitioned colonial governor's mansion, watching his tactical displays dissolve into static. 5 minutes ago, the sky had been filled with the invincible Xenian Concorde fleet. Now there was only falling ash and the terrifying, violent. Atmospheric booms echoed as human drop pods broke the sound barrier. Reroute the planetary defense cannons, Vex barked, his chitinous armor clattering as he paced. Target their descent vectors. Do not let them land. We can't, Subarbiter, a frantic Xenian technician replied, desperately tapping at a darkened console. The orbital defense grid is unresponsive. Sir, the flagship is gone. The entire 7th Fleet is simply gone. Panic, an emotion selectively bred out of the Xenian military caste for 1,000 years, suddenly gripped Vex's dual hearts. Gather the surviving human hostages, he ordered, drawing his plasma blade. Put them in the central courtyard. We will use them as a shield. If the humans fire, they kill their own. It was sound tactical genius against any other species in the Galactic Council. But the Xenians had not yet realized that humanity had temporarily suspended its own morality. High above, the UES Resolve maintained low orbit, acting as a spotter. Admiral Sarah Turner didn't bother sending a warning. She simply directed her weapons officer to initiate a localized orbital strike using kinetic bombardment, Project Thor, colloquially known as rods from God. Before the Xenian guards could even march the captive colonists out of their holding pens, the sky above the governor's mansion tore open. Telephone pole-sized rods of solid tungsten dropped from orbit and, traveling at Mach 10, struck the perimeter of the Xenian compound. There were no explosives, no radiation, just the pure, unadulterated transfer of kinetic energy. The impact triggered localized seismic shockwaves. The Xenian defensive walls evaporated into dust. The anti-air batteries were crushed into scrap metal. Seconds later, the drop pods slammed into the earth, shaking the ground with deafening thuds. Explosive bolts blew the heavy steel doors off, and the 75th Rangers poured out into the smoke-choked air. They moved with a synchronized, predatory efficiency that made the Xenian ground forces look like uncoordinated insects. There were no battle cries. There were no demands for surrender. There was only the rhythmic, terrifying crack of heavy kinetic rifles punching through Xenian armor. Major Abraham Kelly led Alpha Squad straight through the shattered front gates of the compound. A Xenian heavy gunner stepped out from behind a pillar, spooling up a rotary plasma cannon. Kelly didn't break stride. He raised his weapon and fired a 3-round burst of armor-piercing, depleted uranium rounds. The Xenian was thrown backward. Its chest plate shattered, blue blood spraying across the marble floor. "Clear the courtyards," Kelly ordered over the tactical net, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "Locate the hostages. Shoot through the hostiles. Do not hesitate." Vex, watching the slaughter from the second-floor balcony, realized with mounting horror that the humans were not stopping. They were not attempting to negotiate. They were sweeping through the compound like a biological plague, executing wounded Xenian soldiers with cold, mechanical precision. Desperate, Vex grabbed William Granger, the father of the murdered boy, and dragged him to the edge of the balcony. The human man was battered, his face bruised, his spirit seemingly broken. Vex pressed his plasma pistol against William's temple and screamed down into the courtyard, his translation collar amplifying his voice over the gunfire. "Hold your fire. I hold the primary hostage. Drop your weapons or I will burn his skull." The courtyard fell silent. The smoke drifted, revealing Abraham Kelly standing amidst a pile of Xenian corpses. He slowly looked up at the balcony. Vex sneered, his mandibles clicking in triumph. "Your empathy is your weakness, human. You will not risk." Kelly didn't wait for the alien to finish his sentence. He didn't order his men to stand down. Instead, he locked eyes with William Granger. In that split second, a silent, grim understanding passed between the soldier and the grieving father. William didn't cower. He didn't beg for his life. Instead, with a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline, he threw his weight backward, throwing Vex off balance. It gave Kelly the millimeter of clearance he needed. The sniper attached to Alpha Squad, positioned 300 yards away on a ruined comms tower, squeezed the trigger of his anti-material rifle. A .50 caliber high-explosive round crossed the distance in a fraction of a second, completely bypassing William and striking Vex squarely in his armored shoulder. The impact spun the Xenian around, tearing his arm completely off as Vex collapsed to the ground, screeching in agony. Kelly breached the second floor via a grapple ascender, crashing through the glass window. The subarbiter writhed on the floor, leaking blue fluid and clutching his severed shoulder socket. He looked up at the towering human major, his multifaceted eyes wide with alien terror. "We have diplomatic immunity," Vex gasped through his malfunctioning translator. The Council will condemn you for this." Kelly kicked the plasma pistol away, kneeling beside the dying alien. "The Council isn't here," Kelly whispered coldly. "And after today, neither are you." He drew his sidearm and ended the conversation. Abraham then turned to William Granger, who was slumped against the wall, hyperventilating, his hands covered in his own blood and the blue blood of his captor. Kelly holstered his weapon, knelt down, and placed a heavy, reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. "Mr. Granger?" Abraham said softly, the lethal coldness in his voice entirely gone, replaced by deep human sorrow. "We're taking you home." William looked up, tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. "Tommy," he choked out. "My boy." "I know," Abraham said, his jaw tightening. "I know. And I promise you, by the time the sun sets today, the Concord will pay for every single tear he shed." Word of the Oak Haven massacre and the subsequent annihilation of the Xenian 7th Fleet reached the Galactic Council on Citadel Station exactly 3 hours later. The great amphitheater of the Council was a marvel of interstellar architecture. A massive dome of glass and brushed steel where 100 different species debated the laws of the known universe. Usually, it was a cacophony of translated arguments and diplomatic posturing. Today, you could hear a pin drop. Standing at the center podium was Ambassador Daniel Whitmore. He looked entirely different from the desperate, pleading diplomat he had been during the broadcast. His posture was rigid. His expression was chiseled from granite. He was not here to ask for forgiveness, nor was he here to explain himself. He was here to deliver an obituary. Ambassador Whitmore, High Counselor Orion, an avian species with silver plumage, began, his voice trembling slightly. The Council has received sensor logs from the Oak Haven system. The deployment of Shiver-class dark matter weaponry is a Class 1 violation of the Orion Accords. You have evaporated an entire Xenian fleet. You have broken the laws of wartime engagement. There is no war, Counselor, Daniel replied, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. War implies a contest. War implies a mutual exchange of hostilities. What happened today was an execution. You speak of madness. The Xenian representative, a prime arbiter, hissed from his elevated pod. You have doomed your primitive species. Our home fleet is mobilizing. We have 3,000 warships preparing to jump to Earth. We will glass your homeworld until it is a cinder. Daniel didn't flinch. He slowly pulled a small, sleek datapad from his jacket and laid it on the podium. You won't be jumping anywhere, Daniel said calmly. Did you really think we spent those 27 minutes after the broadcast simply spooling up our weapon drives? The chamber muttered in confusion. When Arbiter Kalen forced his broadcast into our communication relays, Daniel explained, pacing slowly around the podium. He had to bypass our quantum firewalls to ensure the video reached every screen on Earth. It was an act of psychological terrorism, but in doing so, he opened a two-way, unencrypted bridge directly into the Xenian military extranet. The Xenian representative's mandibles stopped twitching. Humanity has been fighting cyber wars since before we left our solar system, Daniel continued. Our agencies, the remnants of the old American Cyber Command and the European Intelligence Coalition, have been studying your network architecture for a decade. We didn't just sit in silence for 27 minutes. We were uploading a payload. Daniel tapped the screen of his datapad. The massive holographic display above the council floor shifted from a map of the Xenian fleet movements to a live, horrifying display of the Concorde's entire infrastructure. A polymorphic digital virus, heavily augmented by artificial intelligence, was injected through Kalen's broadcast origin point, Daniel said, his voice ringing with terrible finality. It has been quietly propagating through your military servers for the last 3 hours. It bypassed your orbital defenses. It disabled your slip-space navigation computers. Lies! The Xenian representative screamed. Our networks are impenetrable. Counselor Orion, Daniel said, ignoring the alien. If you would please access the deep space telemetry from the Xenian homeworld. The avian counselor nervously tapped his console. The holographic display flickered, showing live feeds from deep space monitoring stations. The entire council gasped in unison. The Xenian homeworld, a sprawling ecumenopolis of glowing green cities, was completely dark. The massive orbital shipyards holding the 3,000 warships meant to burn Earth were drifting listlessly, their engines dead, their life support systems failing. But that wasn't the twist. The true horror of humanity's retaliation was yet to be revealed. We didn't just shut down your ships, Daniel said, looking directly at the Xenian representative. We accessed the suppression collars of every slave species across your 50 conquered worlds. We deactivated them, and we sent them the coordinates of your planetary armories, along with the override codes for the security doors. The silence in the room was absolute, suffocating, terrifying. The Xenian Concorde had built its empire on the backs of subjugated worlds, relying on fear and neural suppression technology to keep billions of alien slaves in line. In 27 minutes, humanity hadn't just destroyed a fleet. They had fundamentally dismantled the infrastructure of an entire empire and handed the keys of vengeance to billions of oppressed beings. Right now, Daniel whispered, leaning into the microphone. Your empire is burning from the inside out. Your governors are being dragged into the streets by the very people you enslaved. Your fleets are dead in the water. Your military is blind and deaf. The Xenian representative collapsed into his chair. A horrifying clicking wail escaped his throat as the reality of his species' sudden, absolute demise washed over him. Daniel Whitmore picked up his datapad and straightened his suit. He looked around the vast amphitheater, meeting the eyes of the most powerful species in the galaxy. None of them dared to hold his gaze. Humanity desires peace, Daniel said, his tone softening just a fraction, though the steel remained. We will trade. We will explore. We will share the stars in harmony. But let the events of today serve as an eternal amendment to the Orion Accords. He turned and began walking toward the heavy doors of the chamber. He stopped just before exiting, glancing back over his shoulder. Do not ever, under any circumstances, touch our children. With that, Ambassador Daniel Whitmore walked out. The heavy doors sealed shut behind him with a resonant thud. Humanity had entered the galactic stage as merchants and diplomats. But in 27 minutes, they had proved that beneath the suits and the smiles, they were still the undisputed masters of war. If you loved this deep dive into humanity's dark and unyielding protective instinct, make sure to hit that like button to appease the algorithm. Share this story with your fellow sci-fi fans who love seeing humanity break the rules to protect their own. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss another epic HFY tale. Drop a comment below. What would you have done to the Concorde?